Alex, thank you very much for joining us this morning. How's it going?
Yeah, really good. I think we finally got over the stormy weather, the incredible humidity we've had through the year. Don't envy the players going through that every Korean summer. And it's a beautiful time anyway, I think, October, September, as we're still in. And looking forward to the final rounds.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to K-League One coming back. But would you say it's been a good season this season? The schedule's been very intense at times. Has it been a good season, do you think?
I think it's possibly been a great season, although I think the next five rounds will clearly determine that, plus the relegation playoffs after that. But I think the fact that we've got these relegation playoffs adds immense spice in 2022 that we've been lacking in recent years. And then if we think also about the key battles that remain wide open, it does reflect, I think, some frailty in the top teams and unpredictability. I mean, pretty much any game has been difficult to predict. So I don't envy those who attempt to bet on these K-League games. That in
Yeah.
2022, it's been more unpredictable perhaps than ever. But that's a sign of an open and fun league. And so I think overall, with so many key battles, as I said, still to be won, only really perhaps 12th place decided, and even that not guaranteed. You
Yeah.
got to say that's the hallmark of a good season. Maybe a great one.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the team there sitting in 12th, but I want to ask you about any teams that you think have underperformed this season. Songnam, obviously, you might have expected them to finish in and around the bottom three. But is there anybody else maybe that you think's perhaps not performed as well as they should have done?
I mean, it's like a broken record saying FC Seoul and the Blue Wings because ever since I've been commentating on K-League football, both those teams have underperformed, and they've underperformed for a number of reasons. Or for another number of factors, you might say. I mean, the reasons are also, I think, something we could go into during a whole hour of a discussion.
Yeah.
Um, but clearly some management issues behind the scenes. The factors, though, are I think the fans have high expectations. So anytime those teams are not really challenging for the title or at least Champions League places, the fans are not going to be delighted, are they? They both consider themselves among the top teams size-wise. But I think also when you think about the personnel they have, the amount of money they've spent, they just simply shouldn't be bottom half teams. And in the case of the Blue Wings, they're actually relegation threatened, which is just absurd. I would add to that, though, Daegu, they finished third the year before.
Yeah.
And they've got a good team. They've had some real flair with the Brazilian talent. I don't know why they changed managers after finishing third last year. That was disruptive.
Yeah.
But even factoring in all the possible explanations, they've massively underperformed. And again, are relegation threatened. And one more team I'd say is Jeonbuk. Jeonbuk are too good to be falling double figures behind in the title races they've done. They had a series of defeats right at the start of the season, and since then they've never really grabbed this title race by the scruff of the neck, and they've been allowed back in more by Ulsan's weaknesses than by any amazing run of wins that they've had themselves. And I think, you think about their goal scoring. They haven't had any outstanding goal scorers this year. They've just looked off the pace. And it was actually just a few games ago when Seoul drew, I think it was 0-0 at Jeonbuk, when the fans were calling for the manager to be sacked. And that probably is an indicator that they've underperformed.
Yeah, and he's not really been able to find a way to utilize Ilychenko and Gustavo. They let Ilychenko go, which, given the impact that he's had at FC Seoul, just shows that there's still a player in there. It's perhaps his job to be able to find the right combination to get the best out of the best players that they've got at the club. But in terms of teams that have surprised you in a good way, maybe they've overperformed this season, who would you pick for that?
I think Incheon, I would have almost certainly expected them to drop into the bottom six after Magosa left. Stefan Magosa went to Japan. I know he got a very good deal there, but I'm still really sad that he left, and I hope he'll come back to Korea at some point. Korea suits him really well. I've not been following his progress, I must admit, since he left, but he still sits right near the top of the goal scorers chart in the K League, in second place, joint with Cho Kyu-sung behind Ju Min-gyu. So that was a big blow to lose Magosa, but for Incheon still to be a top 4 team, wow, that's impressive. Credit to Pohang for bouncing back after a disappointing year last year. They didn't exactly set the world alight in the transfer window either, and they still haven't properly replaced Ilyachenko since he left for Jeonbuk 2 transfers ago for him.
Yeah.
But I think Ha Young-jun has done an adequate job up front. I'm not convinced by him as an Ilyachenko replacement, but he's obviously a great player to have in their squad. I'd say Gangwon. Chae Yong-soo as manager was a bit of a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
After the era of Byung-soo Ball there, which obviously tailed off and they were struggling, and I think a lot of people would have thought they might be relegation battlers this year. So to be able to establish themselves as a top 6 side with some performers, I think, punching above their weight as well, which we can get into when we talk about players.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, any players then that have caught your eye so far, ones that perhaps weren't on your radar until this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my job is to make sure pretty much all the players are on my radar somewhere. I've got a database for every team.
True.
But players that weren't being discussed too much publicly. Kim Dae-won at Gangwon, 10 goals, 13 assists, amazing productivity in a team that's not particularly wonderful, but as I say, punching above their weight. And got to mention, while we're on the theme of Gangwon, Yang Hyun-jun, he's a really promising player, 20 years old. And when I first saw him earlier this year, thought maybe he was in the same sort of category he was last year, just a bit part player, but he really broke through and impressed with his ball control and really promising. He might yet get into double figures as well for goals this year, considering he's not an out-and-out striker, but rather just one of these attacking wingers / attacking midfielders. I think he's a player who has a bright future. The first player I thought of, though, when I was trying to question myself about players that have impressed me was Go Young-jun at Pohang, because I think when Song Min-gyu was there, players like Go Young-jun were overshadowed. But Go Young-jun, I think, is a better footballer than Song Min-gyu, different sort of position. And he's been scoring this year. I've seen him drop back into more a holding role when they've needed to, when Shin Jin-ho, for example, was missing recently. And Go Young-jun, he's quite a small player. And in last year, sometimes would drift out of games. So you'd think, well, you basically not think about him too much. But he's still only 21, we've got to remember. And so he's going to have that under 22 status next year as well. And really bright future. And I've been impressed with him at Pohang. He's been part of what they've done well. And should mention also Cho Kyu-sung, because even though we were talking about him a lot because he broke through last year with Gimcheon on military service, that was at K-League 2 level, and there was a question, would he do it at K-League 1? And adding that physicality to his game, he seems to have everything. Still a question whether he'll do it for Jeonbuk, because Jeonbuk need to make the most of his talents, as Gimcheon clearly did, and as the national team have been able to do. But that is a big, almost signing for Jeonbuk to have him back from military service. Oh Hyun-kyu is another forward I would mention, because, for him to get into double figures with a struggling Blue Wing side, and another one of these forwards who's young, Korean, has physicality. And he's actually still 21, like Go Young-jun. So there's still a lot more to come from Oh Hyun-kyu. When you think that before military service, Cho Kyu-sung didn't have anything like this type of strength that Oh Hyun-kyu offers. Where's Oh Hyun-kyu going to be in another 3 years' time?
Yeah.
These are two bright forwards for the Korean game, but Cho Kyu-sung's already 24, so he's really got to be doing the business for Jeonbuk next year. Presuming he'll be at Jeonbuk next year, because maybe a foreign side will come in for him. Frankly, sometimes I look at Cho Kyu-sung and I think about players who could do the business in Europe. He's definitely one of them, but at his age now, he's got to be making that type of move.
Yeah, it's a real shame that he was injured for the 2 friendlies recently for the Korean national team, because he would have perhaps perhaps like to audition for that number 9 spot. I think that's not really nailed down by anybody at the moment. Hwang Ui-jo's having not the best of starts to life in Greece, so he's really muscled his way in there as a genuine option, I think, for Paolo Bento to start at the World Cup. And if he does go to the World Cup and he does impress, then maybe he will be able to go over to Europe or somewhere. And you mentioned Oh Hyun-kyu as well. He's done his military service already. What a smart move that was.
Was he like 14 when he did it? I mean, it's amazing even if he's 21. I mean, the thing about Oh Hyun-kyu has got the physicality already. I think for him, it's just a case of just getting that extra composure. Sometimes the one-on-ones, for example, it's a natural problem. I think all 21-year-old forwards can lose their head a bit when they're bearing down on goal. But he does need to sharpen up a little bit with the overall technical aspects of his game. But he's improved a lot in that respect this year alone. And that's why I say he's improved and impressed, because over the course of the year, there's been that clear, visible development with him. But Cho Kyu-sung, as a Crystal Palace fan in the Premier League, if you chucked him in the Palace team, he wouldn't look out of place. I'm not saying he'd be, the most sort of promising forward in the Premier League right now. It's a big set of shoes to fill when you go into the Premier League. But I don't think he'd be out of place. He's proven he's got international class. And if he can just be used in the right way by Jeonbuk or whatever team he plays for next year, then excited to see where he goes.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the final round starts this weekend, and it's starting with a bang, you could say. Jeonbuk versus Pohang is one of the games that you're going to be doing on commentary. What a way to start that is, because Pohang, they like to sort of play the role of a spoiler, don't they, in the split rounds and all that kind of thing. So what a game that might be.
Yeah, Pohang have beaten both of Jeonbuk and Ulsan this year. Particularly, they've been a menace for Ulsan in that East Coast derby. And I think if I had to predict how Pohang are going to do in these final rounds, I think it's more likely that they'll disrupt Ulsan than Jeonbuk. I can see Jeonbuk winning this weekend. And then I can see maybe Ulsan slipping up against Pohang. Not just because of what's happened before this season, but just because Pohang are going to raise their game that bit more for the Ulsan game. And I think, it'll be a big test. I mean, if Jeonbuk don't turn up against Pohang, they can forget about the title race, because they've still got 5 points to chase down, right? So even if Ulsan lose every round, it's up to Jeonbuk to make sure they win. And in the final rounds, when you're up against top half teams, in the case of a Final A team, every match is tough. So pretty much it's must win every game for Jeonbuk. And if they start slipping up right from the off, then it's almost Ulsan's by default.
Yeah, and Ulsan play first this weekend, so a good chance to make it 8 points before Jeonbuk have even kicked off. That can't be easy for either team, really, but you think it probably suits Ulsan to sort of lay that down and marker first and then leave it, up to you now, Jeonbuk, to sort of see if you can respond.
My prediction, I think, this weekend is a draw for Ulsan and a win for Jeonbuk to just close that gap a little bit and make things really tight. I can see that happening. The thing about Ulsan is they've signed Martin Adam, he's just a unique player. His scoring record in Hungary in the last season before he came over here was immense. He's continued with a great scoring record here. But in a funny sort of way, he's not really a game changer. He pops up with important goals, but the type of player that he is, he needs Ulsan overall to be feeding him. And I think Ulsan have gone off the boil a little bit. They've struggled with that On Sang as an option in recent games. Because of Martin Adam coming in, Leonardo's lost a little bit of his steam. And Amano doesn't seem quite at the level that he was for the first half of the season. So I'm just thinking that they're a bit vulnerable, and they've got to make sure. I'd still say Ulsan are favourites to win this title, but I'm just thinking of possibilities to keep things interesting in terms of the title race, and they're certainly there.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is 5 points now, and I agree with you. I think that gap will be narrowed a little bit to make it interesting, and I think the title will be decided either in round 37 or probably round 38, like it was last year.
Yeah,
I think we've all been, you know, even as neutrals, we've been burnt before. Let's just say by having our hopes up for a different champion in the K League. But a lot's been said about that about Ulsan. I mean, heading into the split this time around, I don't think they've had a points gap as wide as this. It's been very narrow in the past few years. Is it their year? I mean, it is the year of the Tiger after all, as we've already said. But
I know.
can they do it? Can they do it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for Hong Myung-bo when I look at him, the Ulsan manager, if anyone's not aware. He's a beleaguered figure sometimes on the touchline. And I think he's done everything right this year in the sense that he's had Ulsan playing good football. He's been, I think they've been the best team this year, the most entertaining to watch, except for a few other teams on their day. But Ulsan consistently have been the most exciting team to watch.
Yeah,
Jeonbuk, when they really turn up, have been great, but they just haven't done it enough, nowhere near enough. So, I wouldn't blame him if it goes wrong. I wouldn't say, oh, it's just Ulsan lack the mentality. But then when you think about a pattern year on year on year, throwing away the title or not doing enough to secure the title, you've got to point to wider issues there. And it's happened under more than one manager, and it's happened under more than one set of players. Can you say it's bad luck for several years in a row? I mean, that's really bad luck if that's the case.
yeah,
Or is there something? I mean, I've been told by people who are familiar with Jeonbuk that there's this kind of winning mentality there, that they always just do enough. Maybe there's something in that too. And I know some people think that Jeonbuk, have rather too much influence over referees and so on. But I think a lot of decisions have gone against them as well this year. VAR over the year has probably balanced out with its bad decisions. And I can't quite fathom it. Ulsan were double figures in front. They shouldn't be losing this. Is it a little bit like years ago when Newcastle were miles ahead in the Premier League and Kevin Keegan went into his rant mode and
I'll
they were
love it if
playing.
you beat them.
Yeah,
I'll love it.
and that maybe Ulsan need to play a bit uglier sometimes just to get the job done. If you had to analyze in any direction, maybe it's that. But I hate to recommend that because it's not much fun to commentate on.
True. Well, they have had some defensive reinforcements come back from their military service with
That's true.
Jong Sung Hyun in particular, who's, I think, an excellent defender. And he's had a bit of a disruptive season because obviously he's been at Gimcheon, back to Ulsan. He's not in the Korea squad at the moment, even though he's fit. Probably should be going to the World Cup because he's a quality defender. But, for Ulsan, great to have him back. But I think this season, maybe you could blame it on the schedule. It's just neither team, Jeonbuk or Ulsan, are in great form, really. We're heading into the last 5 rounds. It's been a long season with lots of midweek games, but there's only one midweek round in the final round, final A and B, which is probably for the best. That might mean that teams will be a bit fresher. They've had some chance to rest after the international break. Is that something that you've noticed, that teams just look a bit leggy?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly don't want the title race decided by fatigue, do you?
No.
And the thing is, like, we've seen condensed fixtures during a very hot and humid time of the year in Korea, and that's only going to add to the fatigue. And now the weather's still quite nice and warm, but much more comfortable. And so both the fact that they're not having to play every week 2 to 3 times, plus the weather's not on top of them in the same way. Hopefully, the team that deserves, based on skill and normal levels of fitness, will prevail.
Yeah. Well, I think the title race obviously is very interesting. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. But also the bottom end of the table, like we've already said, now that 10th is no longer safe, is really adding a lot of spice to what would normally be not a lot to play for in the bottom six. But now, no team is safe.
Yeah.
At the time of talking. And who do you think, from what you've seen so far this season, who do you think will finish 10th, and who do you think will finish in 11th?
Really hard to say who's going to be in 10th and or 11th, let alone what order they're going to be.
Yeah, true.
And this is presuming Songnam's going to be 12th, which I'd like to just believe that it's not guaranteed, although let's come on to that in a moment. I think Gimcheon have lost some key players because of the we talked about Ulsan reinforcing their defense and Jeonbuk reinforcing their front line. That's because those players have left Gimcheon after finishing their military service. That in theory would make things tougher, but sometimes it can be counterintuitive, and sometimes it actually helps an overall squad to lose some of the players who knew they were about to go back, kind of thing. That might have been a factor, and they did lose. They won last time, but for the reason that their squad has been decimated, I'm going to say Gimcheon 11th and 10th. I mean, Blue Wings have been in awful form, but when you think of Daegu with a caretaker manager and the way that they've underperformed, it's a coin toss between the two of them.
Yeah.
I'll say Blue Wings have finished 10th, but I wouldn't be surprised if Daegu were there at all. And even Seoul could be dragged into it, but I personally think Seoul have got enough. They've got enough capability. They've got Ilyichenko up front. They're horribly unpredictable, and they'll probably lose 2 or 3 of the last final rounds, or slip up at least in 2 or 3 of the final rounds. But they'll have a couple of wins that will see them over, I think, because they're already a few points in front. They've got a cushion.
Well, the fixtures have been out for about a week, I think, now, and obviously we've seen which games have been chosen for overseas broadcasting and the English commentary. Is there a game in particular that you're looking forward to the most?
I mean, obviously, Ulsan Jeonbuk is the first one I look at. It's massive. It's literally one of those 6-pointers, and it's going to be quite early on in the final rounds, Saturday, October 8th. So whatever happens, it's going to be impactful. It's not like if it was round 38, maybe the title would have been already decided by then. It would be, probably just a game for pride. This is about much more than just that. Blue Wings Daegu is another one that I'm interested in. And this is like reflecting what you said before about the bottom half being really interesting as well this year. And you can imagine, based on what I said before about Blue Wings and Daegu being a coin toss for 10th place, why I'm thinking that one on Wednesday night, October 12th. And I mean, who doesn't like a super match? Blue Wings against Seoul is going to be Sunday, October 9th. But frankly, every single one of these final rounds, if it doesn't deliver, then those players are letting themselves down. Everyone's got something to play for, and every one of these should feel a little bit like a cup final. So looking forward to them.
Yeah, me too. Even the most casual of observer of the K-League, this is the time to be watching because, like you said, everyone's got something to play for. Which let's move on then to some of the other. We've gone through the title race, to relegation playoffs. What about the rest of it? First of all, ACL. Which team gets third, do you think? Is that Pohang's now? Yeah.
Pohang almost guaranteed. I think of all the predictions, apart from maybe Songnam to finish 12th, that's maybe the safest. But perhaps Pohang are even more likely to somehow squeeze into second than drop down to 4th. Although that would require a capitulation by either Jeonbuk or Ulsan, so it's not likely. But I can't see Incheon or Jeju or Gangwon winning enough to overtake Pohang. So Pohang third.
Incheon fourth, do you think?
I would fancy Jeju to have that place based on their squad and the fact that Jumin Gyu is there and Magosa's not at Incheon, but I would never back against Incheon either. So, if I was really pushed, I might say Jeju, but if Incheon finished 4th, wouldn't surprise me, and I wouldn't put any meaningful money on Jeju finishing 4th.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Songnam already. would it be unfair to say that they're already down? How can they get at least into 11th place? I mean, it's quite a big points gap, but with 5 games to play, it's still doable.
I don't know how comparable it is to what Incheon did. I think when Incheon had their great escapes, they'd started to put a little bit of form in earlier, hadn't they? I mean, I know Incheon pulled off some astonishing great escapes in the past, but this feels like it would be the greatest of escapes if Songnam do it now, especially under the circumstances where their squad, they don't seem to have anybody to really rely on at this point. Incheon, in the past, you could say they had Magosa, for example. Well, a few games ago,
sorry, with Songnam, under the old manager before he left, Kim Nam-il, and under the sort of current boss who's there in charge as the caretaker, it doesn't seem like he picks the strongest team every week. Mulic has to start, in my opinion. I know, he almost left in the summer. He almost signed for JG United, but if you want to have any chance of getting out of it, you have to have him on the pitch, surely.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I think this is why no one's been able to fill that Magosa role, because no one's consistently getting that chance to build that status there. And I mean, it's just a total mess. You've got the Songnam government talking about pulling out of the team.
Yeah.
It's all a bit miserable there, I'm afraid to say right now. But they did have a couple of wins in a row a few games ago now. But if they can manage a couple of wins early on in these final rounds, then maybe it'll give them that belief. But not only do they have to win, maybe 4 out of 5 at least, they're going to need another team to lose most of their games, if not all of them. So there's a lot of moving parts. I think Songnam are down, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, their first 2 games, they've got Suwon Blue Wings at home on Monday, the 3rd of October, and then Gimcheon afterwards. So the teams that are right above them.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing about the final rounds. That they're not playing against Jeonbuk and Ulsan. They are playing against teams that they can influence in terms of those other ones going on a losing streak. So that's why they have a hope. Otherwise, they wouldn't.
The last thing really to be decided, if it is something, is winning Final B. And I say that, with inverted commas, winning Final B, finishing 7th. Often the team that does this has more points than the team that finishes in 6th.
Yeah.
This at the moment, you probably say Suwon FC because they currently occupy 7th place. Is it theirs to lose? Can you see Seoul winning
it is. I mean, a few months ago now, I went to watch FC Seoul against Suwon FC at Seoul World Cup Stadium. And Suwon FC were awful. I mean, they were so negative, and sometimes it's just astounding that they are the team with the scoring record that they have, which is just so impressive. I know they let in a ridiculous amount of goals as well, but you would look at their goals for and against, and you think this is a team that's always going to be entertaining to watch, but it's not the case. They do have games where they're sometimes really pedestrian and not very progressive and not really doing much of anything. But thankfully for them and their fans, more often than not, they've actually done pretty well this year. And Lee Sung-woo has been one of the players who's had a good season for them, clearly. Lars Velvik not quite reaching last year's scoring heights, but he's still a very useful forward to have around. I still don't know whether they're making the most of another foreign player in Murillo, but overall, Suwon FC would probably be the happiest of all the teams as well to finish top of that half, because you think of their recent history, they're still establishing themselves as a K-League 1 team, and that would be more meaningful for them, right? For a team like FC Seoul to finish top of the bottom half is just, being kind of damned by faint praise almost,
Yeah.
So I'd say Suwon FC deserve it and would be the team that are most likely to get it as well. I don't trust FC Seoul at all, despite I think being overall better than Suwon FC. Just a quick word on them. I live in Seoul, so they're a team that I'm very familiar with if I go and watch the K-League when I'm not commentating, that they're arguably the closest K-League One team to me. Well, they are technically and physically. So Anik Su, he seems like a nice guy. Never met him. I've got no reason to support or criticize him personally, but I don't like the way Seoul try to play it out the back all the time when they don't have the players to do that. They're not making the most of the talent they have. Either they need to think seriously about how they're playing their football between this season and next, or they need to have a whole management overhaul. I don't know what's really needed, but for them to be consistently a bottom half team is just ridiculous. And a team like Seoul needs to, for the K-League's sake, be pushing as well. Because you think of the prestige of Korea outside of football in recent years rising. FC Seoul needs to be a bit of a Manchester United of Korea to have that regional prestige lifted. Because when people come to visit Korea, they're often going to a city like Seoul, not Jeonju. No disrespect to Jeonju and Jeonbuk. So it would be massively helpful for the K-League to have Seoul challenging. I think from a economic point of view, I know most of us K-League fans don't really care about that, but I think generally it would be good for the league.
Well, yes, soft power doesn't have to all to be K-pop and a Parasite and other sort of Squid Game. This soft power could come from Korean football as well, definitely. But going back to the point about Anik Su, there's been so many times now where I've watched FC Seoul, even commented on the games, and they've shot themselves in the foot. The first 2 goals really against Daegu in the game before the split, they're just passing it around aimlessly, and they get dispossessed in a dangerous area, and then they get hit on the counter attack. And they don't have the goalkeeper either to play out from the back. Yang Han-bin is not comfortable at all with the ball at his feet. And they've tried, and obviously they've signed that So Ju-hwan from Ulsan. And in the press release that they issued when they signed him is that, he's known for his build-up play, he's one for the future. But he signed an 18-month contract, so that's not really building for the future. It looks more like we're going to bring you in, have a look at you in training and see if maybe there's some potential there. But to me, that says that they are thinking about goalkeepers, because if they want to keep Anik Su in charge, Yang Han-bin, as reliable as he has been, isn't that guy.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing Seoul have done this year is sign Ilyichenko, and that was a big piece of the puzzle that was missing. And I said before when I was talking to you guys on this podcast that that was the missing piece between them and a title challenge. Now, since then, their defensive frailties have gotten worse, and I'm afraid to say that they need to do a lot of work at the back. They've had promising players like Yoon Jong-gyu at right back, who I'm now honestly no longer convinced by. I think their central defensive unit has been either too inconsistent or just not good enough. Ki Sung-yong, they've made a player with great accomplishments who should be able to just hold his position and pass all day long. They made him look weak because sometimes he's having to chase back and defend, and he doesn't have really the pace to do that or the defensive ability. And then they've got attackers like Na Sung-ho who have been made to look very ordinary. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there, but they've got some really good talents who are just massively underperforming. So the only reason I didn't go more into this before when you said like teams have underperformed this year is because I think it's just almost expected now that Seoul are going to underperform.
Yeah, that's the way it is, unfortunately, at the moment. It's, 2019, they finished third, but even then, the second half of that season was quite poor. I think they won about 3 or 4 games after the June Super Match, which just shows how basically they limped over the line. They had to get a draw to finish third and get into ACL, and they did that on the last day of the season against Daegu. It was all very sort of after such a promising start where they thought, well, they might be in the race for the league title here, but in the end they limped over the line. It's not quite been the same since then. So, well, at least with Ilyichenko signing, they've got him accustomed to the team and the club, and then maybe next season you could say that he's been given a bit of chance, more than just a pre-season. He's got sort of an extended preseason to get acclimatized, and then next year maybe they can have a good go at it.
Yeah, I think Seoul need to take a look at everything from the ground up. They've got this immense stadium, amazing geographical opportunity, and they are not making the most of it. Even aside from the playing staff, you go to Seoul World Cup Stadium for the match day experience. You go to the North Stand where you're going to have all the atmosphere. And then they've got all these shops and commercial facilities that are closed down on match day. And they usually have like one convenience store in that North Stand open with ridiculous queues. So, you want to go and get a drink. You're going to miss 10 minutes of the game, 15 minutes of the game. They're clearly making bad decisions when you go back to the pandemic with those infamous dolls that they put in the stands. I mean, I know that's a bit cliche to complain about that now, but I just feel that whoever's making decisions needs to be more in touch with reality of the football experience and with football fans. And I honestly don't know enough about that side of things because I'm focusing much more on the playing side, and I'm also focusing much more on other teams. But as I said, when I've been going for the fan experience, it's usually been in the Seoul area. And so I can speak to that. And frankly, if this was Suwon FC in their stadium that's not purpose-built for football, I would give them leeway. But this is Seoul World Cup Stadium. I'm afraid it's just not good enough.
Yeah. All right, Alex. Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. And, well, I'll probably see you this Saturday.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.